It was a warm summer evening in Los Angeles when the estate of Richard Kensington, a wealthy businessman known for his love of rare cars, came alive with laughter and the clinking of glasses. Guests in suits and gowns wandered the mansion grounds, admiring the lavish displays of wealth. A collection of vintage vehicles lined neatly across the driveway. But at the center of it all sat a silent giant, a pristine 1980 Lamborghini Countach, its angular body gleaming under the golden light. Despite its beauty, the car had one flaw. It had been dead for years, its engine refusing to start. The Lamborghini wasn't just a car. It was Richard's pride, a trophy he had poured millions into. He had invited the best engineers, collectors, and mechanics money could buy, but each one had left defeated, unable to breathe life into the machine. For Richard, this car symbolized dominance and prestige, and watching it sit lifeless was a constant irritation. His frustration, however, was about to become entertainment. That evening, with a glass of brandy in hand, he turned to his guests with a bold smirk. "Anyone who can fix this car tonight," he declared, "will not only earn a reward, but something far greater." Among the gasps and laughter, Richard's eyes flicked toward his daughter, Sophia, who stood by his side in a flowing evening dress. At 28, she was poised, beautiful, and intelligent, but often treated as another jewel in her father's collection. Richard pointed toward her with the same casualness he had used to flaunt his cars. "Fix the Countach," he boomed, "and you'll have the right to marry my daughter." The crowd erupted with murmurs, some chuckling at the audacity, others stunned by the seriousness of his tone. Sophia's eyes widened in disbelief, a flush of embarrassment and anger rising to her cheeks. Standing near the edge of the gathering was Ethan, a 35-year-old mechanic from a modest garage downtown. Unlike the polished men in tuxedos, he wore plain work clothes, his hands stained with grease from a long day. He hadn't come for the party, nor for Richard's attention. He'd been recommended by a friend who insisted Ethan had a gift, a way of listening to machines as if they were alive. Ethan had almost refused the invitation, but curiosity about the legendary Lamborghini drew him in. Now, with the crowd staring, he found himself thrust into a challenge he hadn't asked for. Sophia glanced at him, expecting him to laugh it off or back away. Most men would have, but Ethan didn't flinch. He simply walked forward, calm and steady, his tool bag in hand. He ignored the whispers and scoffs of the onlookers, kneeling beside the Lamborghini with quiet respect. His fingers traced the edges of the hood, feeling the warmth of the metal. To him, it wasn't just a broken car. It was a story waiting to be told. He popped the hood and leaned over, his eyes narrowing as he began to study the intricate system that had defied so many before him. The crowd leaned in closer, some mocking his plain appearance. "Look at his shoes," one man sneered. "You think a guy like that can touch this car?" Another chuckled. "He'll make it worse." Richard, sipping his brandy, smirked with amusement, confident that this mechanic would fail like all the others. But Sophia couldn't tear her eyes away. There was no desperation or arrogance in Ethan's movements. He wasn't performing for the crowd. He was working as though he and the machine were the only two that existed. She watched as his hands moved with patience, tightening bolts, checking connections, and listening intently to faint sounds no one else seemed to hear. Minutes turned into an hour, and the mocking grew quieter. Ethan's focus never broke. Lucas, his 10-year-old son, wasn't with him this night, but as he worked, Ethan thought of him. Every turn of the wrench, every adjustment was done with the thought of providing something better for his boy. He wasn't here for a ridiculous prize or the chance to marry into wealth. He was here because machines deserved a chance to live again, and he knew deep down he had the gift to give them that chance. Finally, he leaned back, sweat glistening on his forehead, and adjusted one last connection. The crowd held its breath as Ethan slid into the driver's seat, his rough hands gripping the wheel. He turned the key, and for a heartbeat silence stretched through the night. Then with a thunderous roar, The Lamborghini came alive, its engine screaming with raw power. Flames flickered briefly from the exhaust as the car idled perfectly, the sound filling the mansion grounds like music. The crowd gasped, some clapping in disbelief, others frozen in silence. Richard's brandy nearly slipped from his hand. His jaw tightened as he stared at the revived machine. Sophia's lips parted, her eyes shimmering with something she hadn't felt in years, genuine awe. For her, it wasn't the car that had come to life, but the truth that stood before her. This wasn't a man chasing status or wealth. This was a man who did the impossible with humility, and he hadn't said a word of boast. In that moment, the party no longer mattered, nor the bet her father had made. Something had shifted, and everyone in that courtyard felt it. The courtyard buzzed with disbelief as the Lamborghini's engine purred steadily, echoing against the marble walls of Richard Kensington's mansion. Guests who had once mocked Ethan now stood wide-eyed, their glasses of champagne trembling in hand. For the wealthy, cars were possessions, trophies to flaunt. But for Ethan, this machine had been a soul, silenced for decades, now reborn. He stepped out of the car quietly, his expression calm, wiping his hands on a rag. There was no arrogance, no need for applause. He had come, he had done the work, and to him that was enough. Richard's face twisted between pride and fury. He had made his boast as entertainment, never believing anyone could succeed. Now he was trapped by his own words, his guests watching him with expectant smirks. To retract his promise would make him a liar, but to honor it would mean surrendering control of his daughter's future. Sophia's heart raced. She wasn't a prize to be gambled, yet her father's ego had placed her in this humiliating position. Her eyes met Ethan's, searching for some sign of his intentions, afraid of what he might demand. But Ethan surprised everyone. He shook his head slowly, meeting Richard's glare without fear. "I didn't fix your car for a prize," he said in a steady voice, his words carrying through the silent crowd. "And I won't marry your daughter because of a bet. I fixed it because that's what I do. I fix things. Machines, engines, sometimes lives." His humility struck like a hammer. Murmurs spread among the guests, admiration growing in place of mockery. Sophia's lips parted slightly, the weight on her chest lifting as relief and gratitude replaced her fear. Richard bristled, his pride unwilling to let go. "You think you can embarrass me in my own house?" He barked, his voice sharp enough to cut through the night air. Ethan didn't flinch. He simply folded his rag, tucked it into his bag, and stood tall. "I didn't come here to embarrass anyone. I came because someone asked for help, and I answered. What you do with that is up to you." The strength in his tone carried no malice, only truth. For the first time, Richard felt the weight of a man who couldn't be bought. Sophia's gaze softened. All her life, men had looked at her for what she represented: money, beauty, access to her father's empire. But Ethan hadn't even looked at her until now. And when he did, his eyes held respect, not possession. For the first time, she felt seen not as a prize, but as a person. She stepped closer, her voice calm yet firm. "Father, this isn't a game. I won't let you barter me as if I'm part of your collection." Her words stunned the crowd further. Richard's jaw tightened, but he knew challenging her now would only deepen his humiliation. The guests began to drift, whispers filling the air. Some admired Ethan's courage, while others were drawn to Sophia's defiance. The party that had begun as a showcase of wealth had turned into something else entirely, a moment of truth that exposed the cracks in Richard's glittering empire. Ethan packed his tools, ready to leave quietly. He hadn't expected to stay longer than necessary. But before he could step away, Sophia moved toward him. Her hand brushed against his arm gently, her voice low so only he could hear. "You don't know what you've done tonight." "Thank you." Ethan offered a small smile, humble as ever. "I just fixed a car," he replied. Sophia shook her head, her eyes glistening. "No, you reminded me that some things can't be bought." Her words lingered in the warm evening air, heavy with meaning. Richard turned away, retreating into the mansion, unwilling to face the shift in power he had brought upon himself. The Lamborghini still rumbled proudly in the background, a living testament to Ethan's quiet brilliance. Sophia stayed, her curiosity growing. She wanted to know this man who had walked into her father's world and left it shaken. Over the weeks that followed, their paths crossed again. Sophia visited Ethan's small garage downtown, far from the marble halls of her father's estate. She traded gowns for jeans, stepping into a world where engines roared and grease marked every surface. To her surprise, she felt free there. Ethan worked with his hands, his heart, his time, never for applause, never for greed. He introduced her to Lucas, his 10-year-old son, who greeted her with shy eyes and a smile that melted her defenses. For Sophia, it was a glimpse into something real, something she had never known. Ethan never mentioned the night at the mansion. To him, the